though, investors delighted, as Simone Foxman mentioned, the stock jumping about 10% or more in after-hours trading. Let's get more from Nicholas Jones. There it is, up 13%. Nicholas Jones, equity research analyst at Citizens JMP. Nicholas, thanks very much. I know it's hard to read these things sometimes, but why do you think investors like the look of the numbers from Airbnb?
I think the prevailing trends in 4Q are just much stronger than folks were anticipating. And, the guidance, well, maybe a little softer than expected. There was some confusion heading into the quarter. Not all investors were necessarily paying attention to some of the dynamics from last year. Easter was in 1Q. You had a leap day last year. You don't have Easter in 1Q this year. There is not a leap day. The company's calling out about a 3% impact. Otherwise, the numbers may be a little bit stronger. But what that also means is the Easter impact is now going to shift into 2Q. Right? So when you start looking at it over a multi-quarter period, I think the prevailing top-line trends look really strong. And, folks were also focused on what was the margin guidance going to be. The company's been talking about launching new business lines. It kind of helped us figure out what is this going to cost, what kind of investment is there going to be in new businesses, and they called out around $200 to $250 million in their shareholder letter. And margins coming down a little bit year over year, but I think potentially not as bad as folks were potentially anticipating with the launch of new business lines.
The company came out, it's amazing, really. It did its IPO in the teeth of the pandemic, and it did get up to north of $216 briefly into 2021. It's about $141 now. What do you think it needs to get back to those old highs?
That it's going to probably be much stronger numbers ultimately. Airbnb benefited from a very high multiple relative to its peers, Booking and Expedia. So I think investors, as this company's grown so much since the pandemic, since the numbers or the growth has started to slow a little bit, you need to really deliver outsized growth and command that type of multiple on your numbers. So the way to get back to those numbers is they'll continue to perform as they perform, but it just may take quite a bit longer. To get to those numbers near term, you would need much higher growth than we're seeing in the guidance. So, when you look at it on a multiple perspective, I think some folks actually view the stock as potentially a little expensive. We have a market perform rating on it. We think it's fairly valued around current levels.
I mentioned before the break, cities all over the world, there's controversy when Airbnb rolls into town. I see Cape Town, South Africa has a rental crisis, and they're blaming it in part on homes being rented out for vacationers or digital nomads. That's always going to be a risk, I guess, regulation changes for this company.
Certainly, you can ask anyone in kind of your natural network, do you want an Airbnb next to your house or your apartment? And more often than not, folks say no, because they're worried what kind of transient folks potentially may, do this not in their home. So they may not take as much care. So that will always be a risk. But at the same time, a lot of the folks who maybe don't want the Airbnbs next door also like using Airbnbs. Yeah. The demand will continue to be there. It's a really interesting way to open up accommodation inventory to folks, particularly in certain areas where there aren't a lot of hotels developed or people do need to travel with groups.
It is a great thing. I mean, it's transformed travel, given the hotel industry something to think about. What about big competitors, though, be they hotel companies, moving more into that model of Airbnb? Could that be a risk for the company?
Yeah, look, if you're doing something well, competitors are likely to follow. So I think competition will likely pick up. But what Airbnb benefits from as it has become ubiquitous. Even if you were to book an accommodation on Vrbo or Booking, you're likely to call an Airbnb to your friends. So they are the dominant brand within this category. That said, folks will come and try to compete. Again, in the shareholder letter, most of their revenue comes from 5 countries, but they're in 220. So there are plenty of countries for them to grow into. There's plenty of room for competition. And, often competition is, multi-list anyway. So even if Booking wants to compete or Expedia wants to compete with Vrbo, those listings will likely end up on similar sites. And same with, hotel chains. If they want to have similar accommodations, they may need to post it on an Airbnb to get it filled, at which point Airbnb still benefits.
It's interesting how this ability to review hosts and guests on the site, and not like other sites, the sharing sites, tends to be a check on people's behavior. I'm looking at a report you did in November. Almost 3/4 of Airbnb's hosts count as super hosts, i.e. guests have had very few problems.
Yeah, look, when you create a marketplace like this, you need to kind of get rule adherence. Right, so how do you create accountability? You essentially shine a flashlight on it. You make people see what's going on. People can leave reviews on the hosts. If they want to fill the room, people look at reviews more than ever on Amazon, on Google, on Yelp, on every site you can imagine. Reviews are increasingly important. There's even AI getting put into reviews so that you can summarize it all into kind of the most succinct, cogent points that you may care about. And then vice versa on the guests. You know, if they damage the property or are not a good guest, not checking out on time, you're kind of alerting fellow hosts, hey, this may be a risk. So they've done a fantastic job at trying to make the inventory high quality and getting adherence to the behavioral rules that they want, which creates a really healthy marketplace.
Yeah, it's interesting. Of course, guests can be picky as well. Airbnb guests can be annoying.